I am Hannah, 28 years old. On what should have been the happiest day of my life, my parents flushed my wedding rings down a toilet and sent me the video. They thought destroying them would teach me a lesson about loyalty. What they did not realize was who my future husband really was and what family I was about to join. Before I share everything that happened, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to rise stronger after someone tried to tear you down. I grew up in a family of four. My father worked long hours in a sales job that barely covered our expenses. My mother worked behind a desk at a medical office and handled most of the household. Then there was my younger sister, only 3 years below me, who seemed to shine in their eyes no matter what she did. From the outside, we looked like an ordinary middle-class family, but inside the walls of our home, everything was measured against an image my parents wanted to protect. Appearances were their highest priority. Our house was modest, 2 floors with thin carpet, dated wallpaper, and a squeaky staircase that carried every sound. We were not poor, but there was no extra money. Even so, my parents chased every chance to look wealthier than we were. They bought name-brand clothes on credit and refused secondhand items, no matter how tight things got. When friends came over, the lights would be on, the best dishes brought out, and our family roles polished. But once the guests left, the mood shifted back to something far less welcoming. Their standards trailed me every day. What I wore to school was inspected each morning. If my jeans looked faded, I was told I was lazy for not taking better care of my things. Grades had the same weight. A B+ brought a lecture about not working hard enough. A student award drew only mild approval, followed by a reminder of the money my parents spent on my education and extracurriculars. They framed every accomplishment as something they allowed through sacrifice rather than crediting me. My sister fared differently. If I carried home an A-, it was disappointing. If she scraped by with a C, it was presented as progress worth celebrating. She received hugs for effort, while I heard questions about why I had not done more. I always noticed these comparisons, but pointing them out only brought scolding. I heard phrases like, "We gave up everything for you," almost daily. Gratitude was demanded, never given. Friendships were filtered through the same standards. My parents wanted me close to classmates whose parents had influence or money. If I chose a friend from a family with less, they pushed me to limit my time with them. They said they were protecting my future, but I understood it as another rule about image. I began to shrink parts of myself, avoiding mention of who I liked spending time with, because there was always another way to disapprove. The irony was clear. We were a working household with bills stacked on the counter, yet my parents held on to status symbols they believed set us apart. Dinner talk included complaints about money, then pivoted to gossip about country clubs or private schools we could not afford. It taught me that reality mattered less than how we looked to others. Living in that space trained me to be careful with words. I kept opinions short, emotions in check, and mistakes hidden. I thought keeping the peace depended on how quiet I could be. By the time I turned 18, I carried a set of beliefs that did not leave me, that praise was rare, that comparison was constant, and that I could always give more without ever being enough. That belief did not stay in childhood. It followed me forward into every decision I made as an adult. When I was accepted into college, it was with a partial scholarship. I had worked hard for it, and to me, it was a real achievement because it meant less debt and some recognition of my efforts. To my parents, it was only a reminder of what I had failed to secure. Instead of hearing congratulations, I listened to complaints about how we would still have to pay much of the cost. In their eyes, anything short of a full ride was another burden they carried for me. That reaction cut the celebration short. I began my first semester not with pride, but with guilt for what they insisted I cost them. I had wanted to study art since high school. I liked time in the studio, and I wanted to learn painting and design in a formal way. My parents dismissed that dream almost immediately. They saw it as a childish hobby, something that could never support me. After enough pressure, I gave in. I declared a major in marketing because it was safer and sounded practical enough to meet their approval. Even then, they did not trust the choice. They told me I was not aggressive enough to succeed in business, and they doubted I would attract good job offers. Comparison became constant. At family gatherings, my name was never mentioned without stacking it up against someone else's child. My cousin who studied accounting was praised for being serious about his future. Another cousin had a business internship before his junior year, and I heard about it for weeks. I carried that pressure back to campus after every holiday or phone call. Their doubts became a second voice in my mind whenever I sat down for an exam or prepared a presentation. Even strong grades felt diminished because I knew the commentary waiting on the other end of my report card would focus on where I fell short. Yet I performed well. I managed high marks across my classes and earned professor recognition for projects I completed. None of that erased the steady stream of oversight from home. If I achieved an A, my parents asked about the class average. If I told them about a leadership role in a student group, they reminded me not to let outside activities harm my grade point average. The message was the same. Nothing I did was enough, and anything I should have done better was already proof of failure. Those years trained me to undercut my own progress. I would succeed in a course only to focus on the single point I missed on a test. I hesitated to apply for opportunities outside of class because I told myself I would not be chosen. That doubt did not come from nowhere. It reflected what I had been told throughout my life. Still, I did not quit. I pushed forward and accepted an entry-level offer at a marketing firm after graduation. The pay was modest, but it was a clear path into the industry I had worked to enter. My parents' reaction was to compare me again. This time, it was a different cousin who had already moved into finance and was earning more in his first year. They framed my own job as behind schedule, as if it were proof that I was always one step lower. I showed up to my new office, prepared, determined, and eager. At home, none of it seemed to matter. Their approval stayed tied to figures I could not provide. That was when I began to sense that the control they had over my career choices would soon extend into my personal life as well. After college, when I started dating, the scrutiny did not end. My parents monitored every step of my career, but they seemed even more concerned with who I chose to spend time with. Each relationship turned into another series of complaints. If a man had ambition and spoke of his career goals, my parents accused him of being self-centered and said he would never make time for a family. If another had a modest job or was still steadying his path, they dismissed him as a waste of time because he would not provide the lifestyle they thought I deserved. It created a situation where there was never anyone acceptable. Family dinners were the worst place to bring someone I was seeing. The moment I introduced a boyfriend, questions disguised as casual talk would begin. My father liked to ask about salary within the first hour, as if that detail revealed everything about someone's worth. My mother would lean into more subtle remarks, asking about future plans in a way that sounded polite but always turned sharp. She might mention how a real provider should already own property or make a point about how hardworking men sacrificed nights out to focus on advancement. Small jabs piled up until the evening became uncomfortable for everyone but my sister, who seemed to enjoy watching me squirm. Under that kind of pressure, I started to withdraw pieces of my personal life. I stopped putting effort into explaining the person I was dating because I knew the commentary waiting back home would twist whatever I said. When my parents called, I edited details or avoided mention of boyfriends altogether. Silence became safer than giving them new material to use against me. On the surface, it may have looked like I was just reserved, but in reality, I was protecting myself from the cycle of judgment. This approach followed me for years until I reached a point of exhaustion. It was not only the criticism of men I dated, but also the realization that I had internalized their voices. Even when a partner treated me with respect, part of me waited for my parents' verdict, as though I needed their approval to validate my choice. That conflict led me to try therapy during my mid-20s. At first, I expected little from it, but the sessions forced me to listen to my own patterns. It was there that a therapist explained something I had not been able to put into words on my own. She said my parents' version of love was conditional. Her point was that their approval had always been tied to obedience and performance, not to who I was at my core. When she laid it out, I recognized it immediately in the way achievements were minimized, friendships inspected, and relationships judged. It was not that I was never good enough. It was that their affection was always chained to control. Hearing that out loud was not an instant fix, but it opened a space where I began to set small boundaries. I practiced answering intrusive questions with short responses and letting the silence stand instead of defending myself. I cut back on phone calls that left me drained and limited the visits where criticism would dominate the room. Pulling away was not easy because I had been trained to value peace over conflict, but the distance gave me perspective. Slowly, I accepted that independence was possible, even if uncomfortable at first. By the time I turned 26, I still felt the weight of their judgment, but I was no longer fully shaped by it. For the first time, I began to believe that I could choose my own life apart from their standards. That change mattered because it prepared me for the relationship that would alter everything, the moment when I met Alex. I met Alex during a work event hosted by a client in the city. It was an ordinary networking night, one of those functions where people wear their name tags and make small talk about projects. He was not even the type to stand out in a crowd. His suit was simple, not high-end, and he carried himself without flash. Most people focused on who could help them climb, but he stayed back, quiet until spoken to. That was how we started. I expected a polite exchange and nothing more. Yet his questions were not surface level. He asked about my work, then actually listened, and he did not try to one-up my answers with his own accomplishments. It struck me because I was used to conversations that felt more like competitions. Over the next weeks, we talked more often. He suggested small things like grabbing coffee before work or meeting for a walk in the park near my office. There was no push, no pressure to define what we were too quickly, which made the pace different from what I had known before. He seemed to understand that I was cautious, and instead of criticizing me for holding back, he let me open up in my own time. That patience was new to me. For once, I was not second-guessing every word I said to make sure it would not get thrown back at me later. What stood out most was his way of listening. If I mentioned something hard about my family or about stress at work, he never minimized it. He didn't try to give quick fixes. He just acknowledged what I said and told me it made sense to feel the way I did. That kind of validation was unfamiliar. I had been raised on critiques, where any sign of weakness was treated as a flaw to fix. With Alex, nothing was treated as too small or silly. I found myself wanting to share more just to see how it felt when honesty wasn't punished with judgment. Even as our relationship grew serious, I hesitated to introduce him to my parents. I imagined the interrogation, the subtle comments about his job, his income, or even his appearance. I didn't want what I had finally found to be tainted by their negativity, so I postponed the introduction again and again. When my mother asked who I was spending evenings with, I gave vague answers. When she pressed, I told her just a first name. It wasn't fear of rejection anymore, but a need to protect something good. Several months into our time together, we planned a weekend trip out of state. It was during that trip when I learned the truth about his family. We walked through a small jewelry shop, and the owner greeted Alex in a way that caught me off guard. It was more than a hello, it was recognition. Later, when I asked, he told me the truth. His family had a long history in fine jewelry. They were goldsmiths, not just for stores, but for high-end clients across the world. Their company had been passed down for generations and was well known in circles far outside the modest life he showed. I was stunned. Nothing about him had hinted at wealth. He still drove an older car, lived in a small apartment, and never used money as a way to impress. When I asked why he had kept it quiet, he said he wanted relationships built on who he was, not on what his family owned. I understood that because I had lived the opposite, where appearances and status meant everything. That was the moment I realized what mattered. I loved him, not for any title or inheritance, but for his patience, his character, and the calm he brought into my life. The contrast between his quiet background and my parents' obsession with surface value became even sharper once we got engaged. When Alex proposed, it was not in a grand setting or with a crowd of people around us. He asked me during a simple evening walk after work, the kind of moment that felt like just ours. The ring he gave me had a design that showed how well he knew me. It wasn't oversized or flashy, but it carried a small pattern along the band that mirrored a sketch I had once doodled on a napkin when we were talking about shapes I loved. He had remembered it. The detail told me everything about how carefully he listened and how serious he was about us. I said yes without hesitation because by that point, I knew I was saying yes to someone who saw me as enough for the first time in my life. Telling my parents about the engagement should have been joyful, but the moment turned cold within minutes. Instead of asking how happy I was, they demanded to know how Alex planned to provide for me long term. They grilled me on whether a prenuptial agreement would be needed, and they pushed to know the amount of money he actually had. The proposal story I tried to share was cut short while they calculated risks. Their reaction wasn't wonder at the ring or excitement about planning a wedding. It was a business meeting where I was an investment and Alex was a liability that had to be measured carefully. The difference between their reaction and Alex's family's reaction could not have been sharper. When we drove out to see his parents and told them the news, they welcomed me as if I had been part of their lives for years. They laughed, asked for the story of the proposal, and even offered to help with wedding expenses. They knew weddings were stressful and costly, and their first instinct was to ease the load. It felt natural and kind, but in my parents' eyes, that kindness was an insult. My father said pointedly that outside help made it look as though they could not provide for their daughter. My mother called it charity and told me in private that accepting it would shame our side of the family. From that moment forward, every single decision surrounding the wedding became another arena for criticism. The venue we chose was seen as too modern and therefore tasteless. The menu drew complaints for being expensive, followed by complaints that it was not impressive enough. I was accused of trying to elevate Alex's family above my own by choosing certain touches, even if Alex and I had decided them together. I stopped looking forward to calls with my parents because each one turned into another list of faults they found with plans that had barely begun. Dress shopping revealed just how deep the divide had grown. When my mother came with me to a boutique, she found fault with every style I tried. If the fit was tight, she said it looked inappropriate. If it was flowing, she said it made me look like I didn't belong in a serious family. She reminded me of what weddings were supposed to symbolize, then added that I was embarrassing her with my choices. Later, when I shopped again with Alex's mother, her approach was the complete opposite. She encouraged me to pick what felt most natural and reminded me that the dress only needed to reflect my own comfort. She celebrated each one, and I felt light in her presence, instead of heavy with shame. By the time of our rehearsal dinner, the tension between the families was impossible to ignore. My father stood to give a speech that was meant to be one of those small toasts before the meal, but his words carried an edge. He congratulated us while reminding the room that real families build their lives without outside resources. It was a dig at Alex's parents, right there in front of both sides. That moment made it clear something I had tried to avoid admitting. My parents were not just unsupportive, they were determined to control and diminish my choices until the very end. As the rehearsal closed, I understood with certainty that their approval would never come. Whatever I thought I could negotiate or soften had been impossible from the start. It would take the wedding day itself to show how far they were truly willing to go. I woke up at 6 a.m. on my wedding day, excited and nervous. The Four Seasons suite overlooking Lake Michigan felt like a good omen. I called my parents at 7:30. No answer. I figured they were getting ready at their hotel down the street. Then my sister called. "Hannah, I don't know how to tell you this." My heart stopped. Mom and Dad are gone. Gone? What did that mean? Were they hurt in an accident? They flew to the Bahamas this morning. Dad booked it weeks ago. They said you made your choice by siding with his family over yours. I dropped my phone. My wedding was in 6 hours. My parents had abandoned me on purpose. But that wasn't the worst part. At 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my father's number. There was a video attached. I almost didn't watch it. I wish I hadn't. The video showed my father's hand holding my wedding rings over a toilet. My mother's voice off camera saying something I couldn't make out. Then his fingers opened. The rings dropped into the water. My mother reached over and flushed. The text read, "You chose them over us. Let's see how far you get now." I sat on the bathroom floor, sobbing. My bridesmaids found me there 20 minutes later. They saw the video. Jess started crying. Catherine, Alex's mother, arrived and immediately took charge. "This wedding is happening," she said, "with or without them." Within 2 hours, new rings appeared. A jeweler friend of the Fisher family rushed them over, not only replacements, but bands of higher quality gold set with small diamond studs along the edges. What my parents had tried to take away was returned to me in a form even more radiant. When Alex's father offered to walk me down the aisle, I almost said no. That was supposed to be my father's moment. Then I remembered. My father was on a beach in the Bahamas. The ceremony was perfect. Alex waited for me at the altar, his eyes full of love. The garden was in full bloom. Our friends and family cheered when we kissed. During the reception, people danced until midnight. My parents wanted me to fail. Instead, they showed me what real family looks like. It's not about blood. It's about showing up. 3 days into our honeymoon in Italy, I posted wedding photos on Instagram. Beautiful shots of the ceremony, the reception, Alex's family. Within hours, hundreds of likes and comments poured in. Then, something unexpected happened. A designer tagged us in her story. The post went viral in fashion circles. People started recognizing the Fisher family name in the comments. In those photographs, my parents couldn't miss the close-up of the new wedding bands. Finer gold, lined with diamond studs, or the 3-carat diamond earrings sparkling against my hair, a gift from Alex's parents. The symbols they had tried to destroy had only come back larger, brighter, and impossible to ignore. My phone exploded with notifications, 88 missed calls, 48 text messages, all from my parents. I listened to the first voicemail when we got back to Chicago. My mother's voice was shaking with rage. "How dare you humiliate us this way? We need to discuss these photos you posted. Call us back immediately." Each message got worse. By the 20th voicemail, she was screaming, "You deliberately hid who the Fishers really are. Do you know how this makes us look? Everyone can see you married into money. We would never have left if we had known." There it was, the truth. They weren't sorry they hurt me. They were sorry they missed their chance to benefit from Alex's family wealth. 2 days later, they showed up at our apartment. No invitation, no warning. "We need to discuss fixing this situation," my father announced, pushing past me into our home. Fixing it? I stared at them. They looked exactly the same, but something in me had changed completely. "You abandoned me on my wedding day," I said quietly. "You destroyed my rings and sent me the video. Now you want to fix things because you found out Alex's family has money." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "We made a mistake. Families forgive each other. We need to meet the Fishers properly now. Host a reception. Invite everyone who missed the wedding." The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to strategize how to benefit from my marriage. "Let me understand this," I said. "You think there's a way back from what you did?" My father's face darkened. "Don't be dramatic, Hannah. Everyone makes mistakes. We were hurt, but now we understand the situation better." "The situation?" I repeated. "You mean now that you know there's money involved?" "We're your parents," my mother insisted. "The Fishers need to meet your real family." That's when I finally found my voice. "I am choosing myself," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself over your approval." They left that night, furious. My father's final words, "This isn't over." But it was. My parents thought they were teaching me a lesson about loyalty. Instead, they taught me something far more valuable. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters. It's about unconditional love, not love with strings attached. The Fishers didn't just accept me. They protected me. They celebrated me. They showed me what healthy family relationships look like. My parents destroyed trust that can never be rebuilt, but they also freed me to build the family I actually deserved. 2 years later, when our daughter was born, I held her and made a promise. She would never have to earn my love. She would never be abandoned for making choices I didn't like. She would know that real family means safety, not conditions. Breaking free from toxic family isn't easy. People will tell you blood is thicker than water. They're wrong. The water of the covenant is thicker than the blood of the womb. Choose your family wisely. Choose people who choose you back.